No, mai hoki mai anō. It is 9:45. You are with Breakfast, and we're going to be returning to our breaking news this morning. A Russian missile has reportedly crossed over Ukraine's border into NATO member Poland. According to US intelligence, it has killed 2 people. International relations expert Professor Robert Patman joins us this morning. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. What were your immediate thoughts when you heard this breaking news?
Well, I wasn't hugely surprised because I think that this has always been a risk with this use of distant punishment by the Russians saturating Ukraine with missiles. And given Ukraine's proximity to Poland and neighbouring countries, this was always a possibility. The question that really, I suppose, we have to unpack here, Jenny May, is whether this missile strike was deliberate or whether it was inaccurate targeting by the Russians. The Russians are engaged in...
Well, I know that some of the reporting is saying that it was stray Russian rockets, so we still don't actually know. We can't confirm which one of those 2 categories it's in, right?
Yeah, but clearly that intelligence, that information is critical to the response. We know that the Polish government is having an emergency crisis meeting of its National Security Committee, and I'm sure there is quite strong and energetic consultations going on now with Washington, other NATO members. Mr. Biden's always been very clear on this, and he's warned Mr. Putin repeatedly. He said every inch of NATO territory would be defended. So I think there will be a reaction from NATO. The question is, how strong is the reaction going to be?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you that, and I know I'm asking you to read the tea leaves, but this is your area of expertise, and I wonder what that response is going to be on both ways, I guess, if this is found to be deliberate or, as reports have been suggesting, that this has been a result of stray rockets hitting Poland. What do you expect that response to be?
I think if it was determined that the attack was deliberate, and there are people on Russian state TV calling for attacks on Poland and neighbouring countries supporting Ukraine, if this turned out to be deliberate, which it doesn't look like it is, then I think there'll be an Article 5 response, which is this provision within NATO that an attack on one member is an attack on all, which would be a full military response. However, if it is as likely to be the case, a straying of a missile which was intended for Western Ukraine, I still think there'll be a response, and quite a strong response, but it may be an increasing provision of weaponry for Ukraine. Remember, NATO has performed a bit of a balancing act in its support for Ukraine, and it hasn't given all the weaponry Ukraine has wanted. Those sort of restraints may be abandoned in light of this episode. So we're, as you say, we're operating a little bit in the speculative area at the moment. We don't have too much information, but it seems to me this is a major blunder by the Putin regime. It sadly predictable, given the fact that Russia's losing on the ground and is increasingly trying to paralyze Ukraine's energy and water systems and fuel systems, I should say, through this intensive bombing using cruise missiles. There was always this possibility of another country being affected. And I think Mr. Putin, we're talking about NATO's response, but I think Mr. Putin is incumbent on his regime also to make clear whether this was a deliberate or non-deliberate act.
So do you expect a response?
No, I don't expect the Putin government to issue a response, but if they are seeking to avoid escalation, that might be a sensible move on their part.
Has this changed the trajectory of this war, do you think?
Oh, yes, I think it's isolated Russia even further because this incident comes hot on the heels of a very damning statement yesterday by Xi Jinping, who said that Russia must respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine, which decoded means, excuse me, that Russia should effectively respect Ukraine as it was before the invasion. In other words, he's asking Russia to end its military operation.
How do you expect things to unfold over the next couple of hours? How do you think what the international response is going to be to what's happened?
Well, there will be an international response. It's a question of how much and to what degree. I think the Biden administration has been very clear about this all along, that it has warned the Russians repeatedly against precisely what has now happened. So I don't think NATO is simply going to roll over. We'll just have to see how the Russians respond and how the intelligence, what it shows about the nature of the missile attack, which has killed 2 people in Poland.
You've talked about the US. What do you expect their response to be, and how strong will that be?
I think it'll be robust. You see, the Americans have been encouraged by the Ukrainian military performance on the ground. The Ukrainians are winning the war on the ground.
Yep.
They have liberated 77,000 kilometers of territory in their counteroffensive since beginning of September. And so the Americans have also been encouraged by the fact that Russia has, through its own actions, increasingly isolated itself internationally. Even countries like China and India, which were initially very ambivalent, are increasingly warning Putin that he must wind up his special military operation. And this incident shows the dangers of continuing it. And I think this is a massive own goal by the Russians. And it will, result in the Americans, I think, intensifying the pressure.
Professor Robert Patman, we thank you for joining us so